All right, John.
Okay, welcome to the 2022 King's College Washington Area Alumni Club's Career Day program. My name is John Wetterau, and I'll be the host tonight for this program. And I'm also a member of the King's College class of 1970. I'm also a proud member of the King's College Washington Area Alumni Club Executive Committee, commonly known as KWAC, KWAC, which what everybody calls us. I'm happy to welcome each of you tonight. We've got students, we've got presenters, we've got alumni, we have friends, and we have some King's staff also involved to our second virtual KWAC Career Day. KWAC Career Day is traditionally hosted here in Washington, D.C. by the KWAC Executive Committee. For many years, this exciting program has provided a wide range of professional opportunities to King's students, thanks to the generosity of many King's DC area alumni and friends, many of whom are presenting and or observing these sessions this year. If you haven't already, please be sure to mute yourself while our presenters are speaking. There will be time for questions and answers, so save your questions for that time. And when you do have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it, or in the meantime, during the presentation, put your question into the chat feature of the program. We have had 6 sessions this year, 2 last night, 2 tonight. This is the 4th session out of the 6, and 2 more tomorrow night. Okay, this one here is titled Making It Happen, How to Get into Graduate or Law School and Work Full Time. We've got 2 moderators for this thing. We have Tara Westington, who graduated from King's in 2018, and Pat Mulloy, who's from the class of 1963. These are also both members of the KWAC Executive Committee. So with that, let me turn it over to Tara, and you're on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation this evening. To all the students, alumni, and friends, welcome. Whether you are considering a graduate school, applying to schools, or planning to work full-time after graduation, I hope you'll find that this presentation caters to all audiences. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my experience, and then I'm going to pass it over to Pat Mulloy, who attended graduate school while he was working and also taught in his career as well. So you'll get a little bit of everything in this presentation. So I'm glad you're here, and let's get started. There we go. So as John mentioned, my name's Tara Westington. I am a graduate of the class of 2018. I received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Studies with a minor in Political Economy. I attended Career Day as a sophomore in 2016. Now, this was pre-pandemic, so we came down to DC on a bus, and we stayed with some alumni, and we were able to check out the Capitol and get a little view of the city. So this experience was the reason why I wanted to come down to the district after I graduated. I felt in my experience at the 2016 Career Day that DC was a little bit more manageable than other cities I had been to. And it was the first time I actually navigated the metro system all by myself. So I figured if I could do it here, you know, I was just loving it. I had a rush from it pretty much. So following this Career Day program, I knew that upon graduation from King's, that it was a place I wanted to consider following my graduation. So what I did was, as I mentioned, I had a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Studies, but what I really wanted to do with this was to specialize in an area, but that area, I had no idea what. So I figured DC was a great place to figure it out. So why did I choose to go to graduate school right after my undergraduate? Like I said, I wanted to specialize in something, although I wasn't quite sure what. but DC has opportunities for policy. It had in business, like an environmental business, sustainability, conservation. I liked it all, but I wanted to figure out which one was my favorite. So DC seemed like the place to do that. So following my graduation in May 2018, I began a graduate program at George Washington University in environmental policy. And now this picture that I've shown on my slide here, it's giving you a visual of all the schools that are in the district. So although I chose to go to George Washington University, there are plenty of other schools in the district as well. And even outside of the district, there are plenty of commutable schools that are in Virginia and Maryland as well. So the possibilities for schools in this area are pretty much endless. And the reason why I chose George Washington was because of the program that I found there. Now, if you're attending this presentation and maybe you're not quite sure if a graduate degree is what you want to do, maybe you're not sure what you want to study, or if you're, willing to do another couple years of school after you've just finished your 4 in your undergrad, don't worry. I was in your spot too. So I want to tell you a little bit about the difference between a graduate certificate and a graduate degree, because those are 2 different things. And I didn't know that prior to coming here. So the program that I did at George Washington University was a graduate certificate in environmental policy. And the reason I chose to do a certificate was because it was only a 1-year-long program, and the credits that I took in this program are stackable. So if I decided after that 1-year program that I wanted to go off and work first and maybe come back to that degree, I can always do that, because those credits that I took in my certificate, they're stackable. So if I want to finish out the full degree, I can do that. Or if I decide that maybe I want to take a different route, that certificate is still standing. It still helps me in my career now. So that's why I chose the certificate program. And it might be a good option if you're someone who isn't sure if you want to do a full graduate program now or later, or maybe you just want to try out some courses. It might be a good option for you. And one other thing, while I was doing my classes at night for the certificate program, I was actually able to do multiple internships. And DC offers many opportunities for paid internships. And I put a statistic here. The average salary for paid internships in Washington, DC is $15.45 per hour. So if you're maybe considering a move down here to do a graduate degree, but you're not sure how you're going to pay to live or things like that, you can rest assured that there are plenty of paid internship opportunities, because that's how I sort of managed to live and go to school at the same time. So there's plenty of opportunity for that if that is what you're considering. So as I mentioned, landing your first paid internship, job, or side hustle. So these paid internships that I did as a graduate student at GWU were essential to finding a job after graduation. I did one internship during the fall and spring semester of my graduate certificate. And then I did a second internship during the summer. And at the time I was ready to work. I wanted to work. I want a job. But I will say, in hindsight, my internships helped me so much in the interview process, because if a job is looking for example, experience on Capitol Hill, I otherwise would not have that experience if I didn't do some of the internships that put me on Capitol Hill and gave me that policy, that advocacy experience that those jobs were looking for. So as much as I was ready to come flying out of the gate after George Washington, my internships really did benefit me in the long run for my job that I currently have now. So I began my first full-time position at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities as an associate for food, agriculture, and natural resources. And actually, some of the people at APLU who interviewed me, I already knew through other people. So not only did my internships help me with the work experience that was necessary for this job, but it also connected me to a lot of the people that just so happened to be interviewing me. So as much as I was ready to go, it really did help me in the long run to do that. And now I've actually celebrated 2 years at APLU, and I've been promoted from that associate position to a senior associate position. So it definitely paid off in the long run to do some internships. The other thing I want to mention as well is that maybe you don't want to go to graduate school right after you've finished your undergraduate degree. Maybe you want to get started and get working and get that paycheck. You can do that as well. There are a lot of employers that will pay for you to go back and get your graduate degree. And that's what's the position that I'm finding myself in now at APLU. So I did this graduate certificate in environmental policy from George Washington, and then I went to work at APLU. And I realized the longer I was working at APLU, the more I really enjoyed agriculture, more than I enjoyed environmental policy, the environmental policy field. So what I'm currently doing right now is I'm working at APLU, but I'm also taking an online graduate degree course at Colorado State University. Now that's different from my certificate. This is now a full degree program. So how that works now is it's all online, and that's also a possibility as well. So there's also online degrees that you can do while you're working. And because we're still hybrid about going back to work, still working from home now, but we are working our way into getting back to the office. The online degree is a good option as well, because now I don't have to commute anywhere to go to class as I did at George Washington. And I can just hop on my computer and get it done at my own pace. So that is also an option as well if you're considering a graduate degree. And sometimes it benefits to work and then decide what you want to study. So the possibilities are endless. You can take any path you want. And if you have any questions, just let me know, because I think I took every path possible. I did a certificate in person, and now I'm doing a graduate degree online while working. So I sort of figured it out as I was going, and I somehow hit every path along the way. So I'll get into a little bit of how to balance your first job and graduate school. So it is a lot, it seems, with working from home or even going to school from home online. You're spending a lot of time in your apartment, for example. That's what I'm doing, spending a lot of time in my apartment. So it's really important to give yourself a break sometimes. For example, if you're at your work laptop from 9 to 5, 8:30 to 4:30, it's really important to give yourself something to look forward to during the week. The benefit of doing an online graduate degree is that you can finish it at your own pace. For example, in my program, as long as you're getting your assignments done by the date that they're due, you're doing pretty well. The challenge is that it's not face-to-face. You're doing online lectures, but you can access those online lectures at any point. You don't have to be signed on at a specific time. It's not a specific day and time that you've got to be there. It's at your own pace. So that helps as well. As long as you're planning your week effectively, if you know you're working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, carve out some time during the week to dedicate some time to it. Another thing I learned as well was I thought I could work full-time and take 2 classes. That just seemed like a good balance for me, but it actually turned out that it wasn't. And I figured that out only by doing it. I found myself just stressed out and not having enough time to properly recharge. So what I did was, instead of taking 2 classes a semester with working full-time, I actually dropped it down to only 1 class a semester. And this time around, I'm finding that I'm enjoying it a lot better and I'm feeling less stressed out. I'm able to provide more effort both to work and to my class as well. And I get to enjoy it a little bit better. So that's also a learning process as well. And I'm sure if you decide to take that path, you'll figure it out for yourself as well, what works for you and what doesn't. I'd also say that in a virtual world, the little things are the big things. Make sure that you're properly congratulating yourself for these things that seem really small, but hey, we were in a pandemic for a long time. It's important to celebrate yourself a little bit and take care of yourself. Celebrate those accomplishments, whether you think they're big or small. You know, if you, for example, I finished 1 online semester of school, and to me, or prior to the pandemic, to me, that would seem pretty normal. But in a pandemic, while also working full time, that's a big deal. Celebrate yourself. And I'd also say try new things because, as I said, I'm stuck in an apartment working all day and then sometimes at night doing school. So I'm sitting at my desk all the time. It's important to try new things. For example, I think I walked myself silly every route around where I live. So I started biking now, and now I really enjoy biking. Or we discovered a pickleball court walking distance from our apartment. So we went and we started playing pickleball. So we've tried a lot of new things in quarantine. And again, that just gives us something to look forward to. So outside of a pandemic, what is DC like when you're not working? It's really fun. So the way that I met some of my best friends in the area was actually joining a soccer and a kickball team. And there are plenty of organizations in the district that organize these teams. So even if you don't know anybody, they'll place you on a team with other people. And that's how I met a lot of friends around here. So that is something that is a super positive about this area, is that there's plenty to do, plenty of people to meet. And I've actually included a picture here as well. So that's us playing kickball in front of the Capitol. So you'll actually get to play kickball or soccer or whatever you want. Softball. I think there's like bocce, there's yoga. Even if you're not super athletic, they've got something for everyone. And it's a great way to meet other people. There's also free admission to the museums and the zoo. So again, if you're a graduate student, don't have a lot of money to spend, there's plenty of free things to do. There's restaurants, there's street festivals, sightseeing. You can walk around the National Mall. There's always something going on. There's also concerts and random last minute events that will show up in your Facebook news feed. For example, I think a couple years ago, there was corgis on the National Mall. Now, I don't have a corgi, but I'd love to see them. So I went to the National Mall to go hang out with some corgis. Another thing that was more recent, of course, it interests me because it was environmental, but there's agriculture on the National Mall this past week, and they had a giant tractor. So there's always something that's going on with the season, especially this time of year with the cherry blossoms that are blooming. So there is no shortage of what you can do on a weekend, even if you have no plans. Sometimes the plans will find you. And I would also say that I actually met my husband in DC as well. So if you're moving down to the area, you might find your partner down here as well. And if you're a healthcare student, he'll actually be giving your presentation tomorrow. So isn't that nice? He's sort of a king surrogate, I call him, because he's been to the campus many times, very familiar with how much I love kings. So if that doesn't sell DC, I don't know what does. So I'm happy to answer any questions about graduate school. I know that you had a meeting yesterday about resume and cover letter writing, but I'm happy to answer those questions as well because I've been through it. Questions about finding a paid internship or what to do for fun around DC. I'm happy to hear any questions. And I'm also happy to connect on LinkedIn. So thank you.
Okay, so if there's any students or anyone, we have alumni and friends joining us too. If anyone has any questions and they want to unmute themselves, please do that now or put it in the chat and I will look for it.
I had a question.
Thank you.
It's kind of two questions actually. The first one being like, when should you apply for graduate school? Like, should you do it your junior year of college or should you wait till like you graduate? And then the second one would be like, is graduate school like even worth it? Like, do you have to get into one of the big schools to like make enough money to have it be worth it, or would like a smaller graduate school also be worth it? So that's my two questions.
I think those are good questions. I'll say for the first part, when should you apply? I would say you could apply. It also depends on the school. So I know that the schools I applied to, they had a rolling admission. So, you know, they had a fall date, they had a spring and a summer date. I personally applied the spring of my senior year at King's because I knew that I would be trying to start in the fall. So it also depends on when you think you want to start. And it also depends on the school. I will say as well, which is really important, when you apply to graduate school, they want you to sometimes, depending on the school, again, they might want you to take the GRE exam. So you don't have to have your GRE scores at the time that you apply. You can just let them know when your test is scheduled for. But that's also something to consider when you're applying, when to take your GRE exam. I will also say that because of COVID, they've wanted to encourage more students to go to graduate school. So some schools have even waived their GRE requirement. So again, kind of depends where you're looking at, when to apply, and thinking about those GRE exams as well. And then for your second question, I thought about this too, like the type of institution, like, does it matter? You know, I had just come out of King's. I'm like, we just spent all this money to do undergraduate. Why would I want to go back to school to spend more money? But I will say that for this specific area, so for Washington, DC, it depends on the type of job that you want. For me, I found that in my field, which was the environmental field, that the positions that I wanted to have usually required a master's degree. So that's why I also did the certificate, because I wasn't sure. So I started with the certificate and I said, let's see how far this gets me. And I started working. And the more I worked, the more I kind of figured out, okay, this is where I think I want to jump to next. And I would look at job postings for those types of jobs, and they would say master's degree preferred or something like that. So it does take a little bit of forward thinking, just thinking about where you want to be in your career, the types of jobs, and then look at similar job postings for those positions. And that can sort of help you gauge whether you think a master's degree in that field is worth it. And as for the type of school, I would say it does not matter too much. It's whatever works with you. So I've done it all. I did the undergraduate private Catholic, and then I did the certificate at a public school, or no, I think it's still private actually, in Washington. And then I went to a public school for my now graduate degree online. So I would say generally, no, it does not matter the type of school. It's just whatever works best for you.
Thank you. We have a before we turn it over to Pat and see if anyone else has questions. We did get one in the chat from Celia. She's asking, is LinkedIn a good place to look for paid internships, or do you have any other recommendations for where to start looking?
Thank you, Celia, for your question. I would say I found mine through LinkedIn. I've also used Indeed. Indeed is a good place for that as well. And those were the primary places that I found internship postings, was LinkedIn. So make sure you keep your LinkedIn profile updated and sell yourself really well. And Indeed as well was very good with internship postings, and for the most part, they're paid. So I was able to apply to a lot of internships that were paid opportunities.
And I'll just jump in real quick there too, because we didn't have this when Tara was a student at King's, but now we have Handshake. So Celia, definitely don't forget to look on Handshake. Tara, I'm sorry you missed that one. It was it's a great tool, but I'm approving jobs and internships at least 100 every day on Handshake. So hop on Handshake as well. So thanks, Tara.
No problem. And if I can't see too well with my shared screen, but if there's any other questions, I'm happy to hear them.
Yep, we have another one in the chat from Kay Westy. How did your post-undergrad certificate program elevate your career opportunities?
Super question. So at first I wasn't sure. I've never heard of anyone getting a graduate certificate. So at the time, I wasn't sure if what I was doing was helping me or if it was just another thing that I had to pay for type of thing. But what I did find in interviews was that the interviewers were very interested in the classes that I was taking. And it also provided a great example to, your employer is always going to want to know if you can handle multiple tasks at one time. And they want to hear an example of a time where you were able to handle multiple projects at the same time. And that's a perfect example. I said, I'm going to school at night and I have an impressive GPA and I'm able to do internships during the day. So it provided me a great example of why I'm capable of handling multiple projects at a time. It could also sell myself that I was doing well in school as well as doing internships at the same time. So that tells the employer, hey, this person can handle anything that comes their way in this job. And it offered a great example of that. It also, specifically to me, was that my undergraduate was environmental studies, which was very broad. And then my certificate helped me to narrow it down a little bit. So my certificate was in environmental policy. And specifically in my position, once I started and I'm still in the same organization, policy helps me with the day-to-day that our office deals with. I mean, we're in Washington, D.C. Policy happens every day, whether or not you are directly impacted by it or indirectly at wherever you're working. It's always important to know policy. So although I did my graduate certificate and then ended up deciding to go a different route with my online graduate degree, it helped me in so many ways in my current job. And even as I go forward, I can put that on my resume. And it just offers that that detailed and concentrated topic to my resume. So it's helped me more than I had originally thought.
Thank you, Tara.
Hey, Beth, can I offer a few words?
Sure. Ambrose, good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, so I'm not part of the group here. I'm a King's grad from way back, 1970, and I'm a professor now in my second career at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and I teach in the graduate program. Plus, before doing this, I had a 30-year career as a partner at RSM. So a little bit about graduate school, and Alexander, in response to your question, I would say, and of course, what I say is all biased towards the business department, business school. So I teach in a business school where we have over 4,000 students in many different majors, and I teach I teach accounting and auditing. But going to graduate school, I think, depends on your discipline. So if you're in accounting or if you're in business, I would say that nowadays employers are looking for graduate degrees. In accounting, it's almost a necessity because you need to get 150 hours to become a CPA. Other business disciplines don't necessarily require it. But what I would say there is that it might be a good idea to work for a couple of years before going back and maybe getting an MBA, because that MBA is, those classes that you take in the MBA department are going to be a whole lot more relevant after you've had a few years of experience. And a couple of other things. So internships. So in our university, internships are an integral part of all of our graduate programs. So it's actually, you get credit for doing your internship. It's integrated into the program. And what I would be doing is talking to some of the people in the department that you might be interested in at whatever university. Don't hesitate to ask to talk to the professors, to current students, and to graduates. Take a look at what their placements are. And I think you can get a pretty good feel as to whether it's worth it or not and where you might find a really good fit. And one other thing I want to say about online classes. And so through the pandemic over the last couple of years, I've had the chance to teach online and now back in the classroom, online synchronous and online asynchronous. And it sounds like what Tara's doing is mostly asynchronous classes. Those are, for me, it's a challenge, okay? Because I like the interaction. I like interacting with my students. So you might want to also look at opportunities for synchronous classes where you do show up at a certain time and where you have the chance to interact with other students and with the professor. They're a whole lot more fun, I think, for the students and a whole lot more fun to teach, but I realize that people have work schedules and so on and so forth, but trying to get participation in an asynchronous environment can be a bit of a challenge for the instructor.
Thank you. That's a good point. There are both fully online and then synchronous that you talked about, where some is online and some is not online. So
right. So if a university has a program that's described as online, then they have to offer all of the required classes asynchronously. And so one of the classes I teach is asynchronous, but once a week at 6 p.m. on Monday nights, I offer a live review session, and there are a number of students, and I record it, okay? The lectures are all pre-recorded, but this is an extra session where we work through problems, where I can interact with the students. There's a lot of back and forth. And then, if a student can't make it, I can post a link to the recording.
thank you.
Mhm.
Now, I don't want to take too much extra time because I am going to switch gears a little bit. I am going to pass it over to Kristina Murfin, who is the Director of Admissions at Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. So if you're thinking graduate school or if you're thinking law school, Kristina can speak to the law school aspect of it. And she'll also be joined by King's alum Pat Mulloy, whose career was enhanced by going to graduate school at night. And he also taught graduate school as well. So the conversation continues. We will shift gears to law school and I will pass it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Ambrose, for jumping in. We are very lucky that we have Kristina Murfin on here. She's the Director of Admissions at the Catholic University Law School. But before we turn to Kristina, I just want to tell you about my own experience. I'm a King's graduate, 63. I grew up in Kingston. I went to King's, and I was what we call the day hop. When I was a sophomore at King's, John Kennedy came to the Valley to campaign for the presidency. And I was at that rally and I got to shake his hand twice. After that, all I wanted to do was get to Washington and help out the public and serve the great republic. A professor at King's told me about the Foreign Service, so I geared myself to pass the Foreign Service exam. You do a written exam and then an oral exam. When I graduated from King's in 1963, I did take the JREs and I did get a fellowship then to go out to Notre Dame and do a master's degree. I want to thank the Holy Cross priest who founded King's College, and also priests from Notre Dame came to found King's College in 1946. And we have J.T. O'Hara on here. He's another Catholic University King's graduate who was a Catholic University Law School guy and will help get Kristina to be on our program tonight. Now, let me tell you about my experience. I came to Washington after I passed the Foreign Service exam, written and then the orals when I was at Notre Dame. I'd never been to Washington before. I show up here in June of '65, a class of 25 people. They taught me French and they taught us a little bit about Washington for 6 months. And then I went off to Montreal, Canada for 2 years to follow the French separatist movement. When I came back to Washington in the spring of 1968, I was working in Maine State, and it quickly became quite apparent to me that Washington, the most influential people in Washington were lawyers, and that I needed to get a law degree. And I said, how am I going to do that? Then I found out you could go to law school at night. What I found out was we have 5 great law schools here right in the Washington area: Georgetown, GW, Catholic, American University, and George Mason University, which is right across the river, Potomac River in Arlington. I had taken the LSATs. I applied to Georgetown and GW. I got in both. I decided to go to GW because it was a 5-minute walk from the State Department over to the law school. And I started there in September 1968. And here's what, and there were a lot of, what you could do, you go to law school, I would work all day from 8:45 to 5:30, run down in the cafeteria in the State Department, run over to law school, begin classes at 6 o'clock, and be in classes till 8 o'clock. You know, you're taking constitutional law, you're taking administrative law, environmental law, corporations, antitrust. And what you found out was you had a lot of really nice people over there in that law school. The professors were good to us, and the fellow students were all ambitious, smart, hardworking people. So we went around, I went around the calendar for 3 years, and I got a law degree out of that law school with honors in 1971. Now, while I was in law school, what I found out was state government won't pay for a law degree, but I had a boss who would say, he needs this course in international law. That'll be helpful for him. And so they would pay for that. So you'd find ways. The second thing I found was I lived in Washington, D.C., and I lived in a low rent district. I had a Murphy bed. You know what a Murphy bed is? You pull out of the wall and you sleep and you push it back up. And I kept my expenses down. And so I got out of that law school without any debt. Now, what you find in Washington, and I heard other people talking about this in the other panels that we've already had, OPM and then government contracts. You can get, once you're in government, you're not stuck in one agency. You can move around inside the government once you're inside of it. And so what I found after I finished my law degree, the state put me working on the Law of the Sea conference. And I took the Pennsylvania bar and the DC bar. And I was lucky enough to pass both. But I figured I better learn how to litigate. So I went over to the Justice Department, got hired by Justice, and I did litigation for a number of years. But I found litigation was not my cup of tea. I like policy stuff. And I figured, well, I got to get up to the hill. And I was lucky enough to get up to the Senate Banking Committee. And because I had that law degree, it helped me get up there. And once I'm up there, I'm general, within 5 years, I'm general counsel of the Senate Banking Committee. So I'm helping make laws. And you're in with the politicians then. And if they like you, and they like people like us from the Valley and other places, who are just hardworking, good people that want and treat their fellow people with respect and love. And if you do that, good things can happen. So because I was general counsel of the Senate Banking Committee, because the politicians like me, I became an assistant secretary for trade under President Clinton. So I had a worldwide portfolio. I traveled all over the world as an assistant secretary for trade, opening markets and working to enforce trade agreements for the United States of America. When that ended, I had a chance to go to a law firm and be a lawyer lobbyist, but that didn't appeal to me. And fortunately, the Congress created a commission, the bipartisan commission, to look at the whole U.S.-China trade and economic relationship. And I got, because I was in with the politicians, I got an appointment to be a commissioner on there. And I had 5 two-year terms on that commission. We went to China every year for 5 years. We went to Japan, we went to Korea. We got to look at globalization and what was really going on. And how did I get that? That law degree was so helpful to me in the fact that I had that kind of background. And now let me tell you another thing about law school. Many of the people in law schools weren't your traditional liberal arts people. Many of them were engineers and chemists and other things, because they would find out you could become a patent lawyer or you could become a copyright lawyer. Now we call those intellectual property rights lawyers. I think they can bill more if they call themselves intellectual property rights lawyers. So that's what they do. So the other thing is, when you're going to law school at night, you have 2 lives. You have your work life, and then you have a whole group of other people who I like. One of the guys was an Air Force Academy graduate. And then after he got out of the Air Force, they sent him to Stanford to do an MBA. But he came to Washington. He recognized, like I did, that lawyers ran the town. So he went to law school at night. And we became friends. And he said, Pat, let's take our girls out Saturday night. I said, Bill, the girl I've been dating, not steadily, but I dated her time. I said, she's out of town. He said, take out my cousin. She's just back from the Peace Corps. She was going to GW at night in graduate school. I took her out and I ended up marrying her. So there's all kinds of good things that can happen if you're busy, but you're not so busy that life doesn't go on. And I would always try and get some time on Saturdays. Classes were from 6 to 8. I'd study till 10 in the law school library and go home, walk home. I walked because I wanted to get the exercise. And then on Saturdays, I would take a day off. Sunday, I'd be in the law school library studying. But it was worth it. And it was worth it. And it opens up enormous opportunities in life. So once I was on that China Commission, it wasn't a full-time position. I found out I could teach. And I went over to Catholic U. I knew the dean over there because he had been out at Notre Dame in the law school there when I was out at Notre Dame. And he hired me, Kamik. And I became a teacher at law school. At GW, I taught international trade law and public international law. And then because I had that teaching, I went over and talked with George Mason University. I started teaching over there at night as well. And again, what I want to emphasize, Bill Barr, he was the Attorney General under Trump. And before that, he was the Attorney General under Bush, the first Bush. He went to law school at night at GW while he was working at the CIA. Senator Robert Byrd, who was the former majority leader of the Senate. He went to American University Law School at night while he was a senator. So there are an enormous number of people who are going to law school at night in Washington, D.C., because they know it really enhances your career and your knowledge of how the town works and your connections. So I feel so fortunate that I did it. And I'm so glad that Kristina Murfin is here with us, because that Catholic University Law School, I love being part of it, Kristina. And I'm so happy that you can tell these students how you can get into a wonderful law school like that, how you take the LSAT, what kind of grade you need, and how you can get financial aid to go to these law schools, even if you want to go day or night. And then the kind of help that the law schools give to you in getting jobs as you're coming out of these law schools. So Kristina, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here today, speak to you all about applying to law school. Just a little brief background on who I am and why I'm here today, because I did not go to King's College. I've been the director, currently the director of admissions for the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. I've been here 12 years. I started here as an admin while going to graduate school part-time. I did attend Catholic for undergrad and graduate school, so I'm pretty well versed in all things with the university here. And I kind of just was back and forth between law school, graduate school. I took some time off, worked for a lawyer, realized maybe that wasn't the career path for me. Went back for graduate school, studied political theory, got this job here, and found my career path. It was complete happenstance. I started working here because I got tuition assistance, but 12 years later, I'm still here. So that's something else to consider. You can work for universities and get tuition assistance. So my graduate
You're
degree,
not only still there, you're now
yeah, yeah, went from an
admissions at the law school. I should have pointed that out. Kristina.
Yeah. Started out as an admin and now I'm the director of admissions. And my graduate degree was pretty much paid for because I could take up to 2 classes every semester with tuition assistance. But you cannot work for like the department you're working for in the school that you're going to. So you couldn't work for the law school and go to the law school part-time. And it won't really completely cover your law degree anyway. So I'll just say that. But enough about me. Just talk about the admissions process very generally, and then I can get more school specific. Happy to answer questions afterwards. About applying to law school. If you have questions about, the Columbus School of Law, happy to answer those too. And I'll talk a little bit the difference between going to law school part-time and full-time. You're kind of deciding which one will be best for you. Your first step when you're thinking about going to law school, for those of you who maybe haven't started this process yet or are very early stages of thinking about it, is the Law School Admissions Council. Their website, lsac.org, is kind of a one-stop shop for everything. It's where you're going to find every ABA approved law school application. So all 199 law schools out there, their applications are going to be on there. It's where you're going to register to take the law school admission test, the LSAT. You'll send them copies of your transcripts, letters of recommendation. So you're not requesting multiple copies of these things. You send one copy of your transcript to LSAC, they verify it for you and for us, and calculate your GPA. Same with like letters of recommendation. We don't have to verify any of those. They're going to do it for us. So they really streamline the process for you, easy for you and for us as well. And they have a lot of really great free resources, and they're constantly adding to their programs. They have free LSAT like exams that you can use to study off of, free practice exams, and they offer free test prep as well now. So especially if you're just really early on thinking about law school, lsac.org will answer a lot of just your general questions about how this process works. And then like once you start narrowing it down to which schools you're going to apply to, whether you're going to focus on the law schools in Washington, D.C., and there are some great ones here, or you're looking at more like specific programs, and maybe you're going to be applying all over the country, start reaching out to the schools you're going to apply to, because they will have more like school specific requirements. They may have different advice on how their application cycle works. So it's always good. We're here to answer your questions, even though all the law schools out there, we want to help you and guide you through this. So along with your application, you'll be required to submit a personal statement and a professional resume. Some law schools will give you the ability to maybe submit a diversity statement. Some will have other school specific essays as well. So along with your personal statement, they may ask why we don't have one, but like why Catholic law? You can always supplement your application with a school specific essay as well. You also are able to add any addendums you think may be necessary for your application. Maybe explain a bad semester that you had in undergrad where your grades weren't quite as high as they were the rest of the time, or maybe you got off to a rocky start your freshman year. There will be a series of character and fitness questions on every law school application, and these are really important, and you should pay attention to what the schools are asking you, because ultimately these are the same questions that are going to be asked on your bar application. So they can be very specific to their state bar exam. So every school may word their questions a little differently. And it's important that you are open and honest with your answers to these questions. Very rarely is a character and fitness issue going to be a reason you are denied from the law school, but hiding that information could become a problem down the line. We have revoked admission when people came forward later with information. You may be asked to leave a law school you've already enrolled at if something comes to light. And it can be an issue, again, if like you're submitting those bar applications, you may not be eligible to sit for the bar simply because you hid the information from them, or it could just be a delay because what they're finding isn't matching what's on your law school application. You will take the law school admission test. Every law school in the country takes the LSAT. There are a select few, about a quarter of them are now accepting the GRE. But I will say if you're debating between taking the LSAT and the GRE, take the LSAT. Every law school takes the LSAT, not every law school takes the GRE. If funding is receiving scholarship and funding may be a concern for you, a lot of law schools don't have scholarship funds for people submitting their law school application with a GRE, just because it's still so new and so few people ultimately end up applying with a GRE score. But reach out to schools, see what their policy is about accepting your GRE. Some are contingent on you having already completed a graduate program. They don't just accept the GRE in lieu of the LSAT. They're looking for other very specific things. You will submit an LSAT writing sample, which you now do at your own leisure. You can do it at the comfort on your own home computer. And I should also say the LSAT is completely digital now. They had already switched to a digital format before the pandemic, and now you do take it at home. I think they're going to be looking into doing it in person again, but right now for the last 2 years they've been offering what they call the LSAT Flex, and you do it from home with a virtual proctor, which is kind of nice. You kind of get take it at your own leisure. But you have that LSAC writing sample, all of your transcripts. So even if you took one summer course at a community college, you need to submit that transcript. And LSAT will give us kind of like your degree summary GPA and a cumulative GPA. And you may notice that cumulative GPA is slightly different from what your school is reporting. Again, that's because they're taking everything. They also, if you were to, they handle withdrawals differently. If you retook a class, they count everything. So sometimes there is a slight discrepancy in what LSAT or LSAC is reporting versus what your school is seeing. But we see your transcripts, we see your grade progression, see maybe where something went wrong. And then you'll be required to submit letters of recommendation as well. And it's usually about 1 to 3. You do want to make sure with school, your personal statements, the school is asking a specific question, you answer that question. You want to make sure that you're sticking to their page links, you're writing about the right school. It happens every year. We get personal statements that talk about other law schools that they're applying to. So just being mindful, like we know you may be applying to every law school in DC. We're not, we're well aware of that fact, but it can be almost an instant denial when we get into your personal statement, and this is why I want to go to George Washington for law school. And every law school, I would say at minimum are going to require one letter of recommendation, usually at most 3. They all have different policies on whether they should be academic or professional in nature. I would say if you are still in school or only a couple years out, there should absolutely be an academic letter of reference. The further removed you get from school, we're not really looking for those, but something you may want to consider while you're still in school, start asking professors now, even if you know you're going to wait a couple years. Your account with LSAC is good for 5 years, so you can start asking for those letters of recommendation and they can sit on your account for at least 5 years. And that 5-year time frame is when like a lot of law schools may be looking for those academic letters. So that's just kind of like a general overview of how the application process works. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're kind of going back and forth, like, do I want to go to law school full-time or do I want to go part-time? It's going to be the same application process. It isn't going to be any easier to get into a part-time program. That's not some kind of conditional program either. I do think sometimes there's a misconception about that. Some people think like, oh, well, okay, I'll apply to the part-time program, or I'll just apply and maybe they won't accept me for the full-time program, but they'll admit me to the part-time program. That's not the case, especially when you're looking at the law schools in Washington, D.C. Our programs are really designed for working professionals. So the only real difference in anything is that those applicants maybe tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more professional experience under their belt. But other than that, there's actually fewer seats, so it's a more competitive process when you're looking at part-time programs. There's a lot of different reasons for why someone may decide to go to law school part-time. As I mentioned, our part-time students, they do tend to be a little bit older. The average age for our part-time students is 29 versus 26 for our overall student body. So they tend to be a little bit more established in their careers, maybe can't leave that professional experience. They have families at home, or they know that their job is going to lead into, like, this law school is going to lead to their next step. But there's no requirement to be working full-time. We don't ask for you to like prove that in any way. I would say the majority of our students are doing something, whether it's working or staying at home with the family during the day. Most people aren't going to choose to just kind of do nothing all day and go to law school at night. And our students, they do your typical DC thing. They're working on the Hill. They're working for senators, congressmen and women, the White House, all the different government agencies. Very typical thing you might think of in DC. They're paralegals for law firms. But then we have teachers, we have police officers, we have active duty military. So part-time really brings in a pretty diverse student body. But we also have students who come straight from college who decide that part-time is the right program for them. Maybe they got a job opportunity, they don't want to give that up, or they need to work just to help supplement their expenses, not take out as many student loans. DC is not a cheap city to live in, so working is definitely a possibility. A lot of our students, they're going to law school to the next step in their current career. We mentioned being like intellectual property patent examiners and attorneys. So we do have students that work at the patent and trade office that are patent examiners right now. They want to be patent attorneys. So they are doing this for their next career goal. You do have to have a science background, but the PTO does pay for your law school. So that is something to keep in mind. Not a lot of there's not a lot of people out there that do that, but PTO will pay for your law school. We have people who completely change their career paths from what they were doing when they started law school and when they come out. Every school obviously is going to have a career and professional development office, and they're there to assist you and guide you no matter what you do. Kind of, especially with part-time students, here's some classes you can take. Here's some things you can be doing outside the classroom and outside your potential full-time job to help make that transition into a legal career. The really only other difference between going to law school part-time versus full-time is the length. Our part-time program takes 4 years to complete versus 3 years going full-time. We do have students that are able to do it in 3.5 years. They are maxing out their credits. They might even be studying abroad in the summer. I'm not really sure how they all do that. I do know students who have done that. But in terms of curriculum, classes, professors, it's all going to be the same. You'll have access to the same student organizations and resources. No one's going to tell you you can't do something just because you are a part-time student. You may just be a little bit more limited in the extracurriculars that you take on because you are working a full-time job, going to law school, but you can do it whatever you want while you're here. And you can also switch between programs. If you start out part-time and you realize, you know what, this isn't for me, I really just want to go to law school, you can switch to the full-time program after your first year and vice versa. So that is also an option for you as well. Sometimes full-time students, they get a great career opportunity. They don't want to earn credit for it. They want to be paid. So they switch to the part-time division. But for those who are full-time, you can go to law school full-time, you don't want to work, but maybe, you know, your first year is really just going to be focus on your first year studies. There used to be rules about the number of hours you could work as a first-year law student. Those don't exist anymore, but generally speaking, we say don't take on more than 20 hours a week. You're in class from about 9 to 4. Our classes are all Monday through Thursday. We don't have Friday classes, but it's really difficult to work a typical full-time job and go to law school full-time. But once you're in your second and third year, you can be working, earning credit for that. At the Columbus School of Law, we allow you up to 22 credits in externship. So of the 87 it takes to graduate, you do 22 outside the classroom. And it's a great way to start building your professional network. And a lot of those opportunities that you take on where they may be free, you're earning credit for them, they may turn into your full-time employment after you graduate as well. I'll talk very briefly about like financing. So most law schools, your scholarships are going to be merit-based. What that means is they're going to award them based off of your LSAT score and your undergraduate GPA. So most aren't going to have additional applications you need to apply for. They're going to consider you for those right off the bat. That's how our policy is. Not a lot of law schools have need-based scholarships, so that's something to keep in mind. So that's why it's important to not only do well in undergraduate, but do well on the LSAT too, because it will allow for a larger scholarship amount. There may be opportunities going forward to raise your scholarship, outside opportunities, stipends that become available. But for the most part, that initial award that a school gives you is going to be merit-based. And then you'll just take on additional funding if necessary.
Kristina, well, we still have time. Can we ask if any of the students have any questions?
Yep.
Or either for you or for me regarding these law schools in the DC area? I think, Kristina, there is financial aid available for students as well. I don't know whether it's nighttime students as well as daytime students, but that's an issue.
Yeah, they have, our part-time students they'll be considered for the same scholarships. Ours are built in such a way that, so our tuition, whether you go full-time or part-time, is going to be the same amount, more or less. The difference is pretty minimal. And so our scholarships, it's the same like percentage off. So ultimately, whether you're going full-time or part-time, it's the same like award package. You're considered for the same thing, and you're eligible for federal aid as well as a part-time student. Just because you are supplementing it with an income doesn't mean you can't also take out federal loans.
Well, why don't we open it up for any students or others who have questions for either of us?
Yeah, there was a question in the chat that was right about this subject. And I think you touched on it, but it's just the question was, does your likelihood of receiving a scholarship depend on when you apply in the admission cycle?
Yeah, so most law schools practice rolling admission. So application cycles open up in the fall, usually close around this time with seat deposits due in April. So the earlier you can submit an application, the more, I mean, I don't like to say it's easier to get in, but think of it this way, like all the seats are available in November. All of our scholarship funds are available in November. All of that becomes smaller and smaller as we go on into the cycle. We've been pretty lucky where we've been able to continue awarding scholarships well into the spring. Last year, we did see an uptick in our application volume and more people accepting our acceptances than we had anticipated. So our scholarships did get a little bit smaller as we went on. So some of our students weren't receiving the same amount of funds. We offer full tuition scholarships. We had to stop those last year because we didn't have any more to give. And every school is different. Some, like, they stop awarding them after a certain point because they just, nope, you apply now, and if you apply later, you know that you're probably not going to get a scholarship. I know some schools with their early action programs or early decision programs, you are waiving a scholarship consideration. So there's different ways. So yeah, I would just encourage everyone to apply early for lots of reasons, but especially for scholarship consideration.
Kristina, you might want to mention something about your placement program.
Placement program, like for
Your-
jobs?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have our Office of Career and Professional Development. They're there for everyone, whether you're a part-time or full-time student. You will do an intake interview with them your first year. They'll give you general guidance and advice on what to do over the next 2 years, classes to take, maybe some externships to go for. And you'll often hear the term externship with law schools. It's not any different than an internship. They just call them externships. It's the same thing. So they'll give you some general guidance, but they'll do like externship fairs, networking events, different panels. They're not going to go out there and find the jobs for you, but they're going to give you the guidance that you need. Do mock interviews with you, look over your resume. We're such a small law school. We only have about 400 total students that our Office of Career and Professional Development really gets to know the students really well and individually, and they'll reach out to you directly with like opportunities. And again, like, they're going to give you advice. They're going to give you these opportunities, but it really is up to you to go out there and like wow them. But yeah, just work with our Office of Career and Professional Development. For our class of 2020, we had an 88.6% employment rate. What that means is 88% of the class of 2020 had a job that required them to have a JD. That doesn't necessarily mean that 12% of our student graduates weren't working. They just may be working in a field that didn't require their JD or to pass the bar exam. The class of 2020 information should be out soon. We start collecting that 9 months after graduation. So we do have a really great job placement, even in a very competitive city.
Let me just pick up, when Tara was talking, she mentioned about how when she had her opportunity to work while she was going to graduate school, that opened up doors because she was meeting people outside.
Mhm.
My understanding is Catholic U has these great externship programs where they send kids while they're in law school over to work at a place like the Federal Communications Commission.
Yeah.
And then they become top lawyers dealing with this mushrooming job of telecommunications, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to mention that because there's been major articles about that kind of program that is going on down here with these law schools.
We have a really strong communications law program. The current commissioner of the FCC is a Catholic law graduate, and the former commissioner of the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC, went to law school part-time at Catholic. So lots of career paths into those fields. We definitely, usually somewhere around 40% of our student body does go on to work for the government. For 2020, it was a little bit smaller, but.
Yeah, I should note that Charlene Barshevsky, who is the U.S. trade representative under President Clinton, was a CUA law graduate.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've pretty much finished up our thing. We've gone a little over, but that's some great input from the presenters. I want to thank Tara, Pat, and Kristina for all the information you've provided. We had about 35 people who are interested in hearing you off and on over the last hour and 10 minutes. So I want to thank you. I also want to take this time to do a little commercial for our last two sessions of tomorrow. We have our session at 5 o'clock tomorrow, which is healthcare opportunities in the greater Washington area. And then our last session, which is another one that Pat is involved with, and that's going to be how recent federal legislation to rebuild our infrastructure and meet the competitive challenge from China will create millions of good jobs in America. So those are our two. Hopefully we can see some of this.
JT O'Hara is also on that panel. And he's
Right.
able to get somebody from Secretary Buttigieg's office, who's the Secretary of Transportation, to come in and talk about the millions of jobs that are going to be created, good jobs in this country by the infrastructure bill that was just passed by the Congress. So that should be a key interest to the students, because jobs are going to be talked about tomorrow.
And that's a double advertisement then for tomorrow's last session, which will be 6:15 tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank everybody for all their work and attention, and hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow. Thank you.
Kristina, thank you again.
Of
We
course,
really
yeah, thank
appreciate
you for
it.
having me.
Okay.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Christina.
John, Beth, Jim.
Yeah.
See you all
Thank you so much,
tomorrow.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night,
Night.
everyone.